Hey, happy Friday to all the dads out there. My name is Chris Eischen at the Modern Dad Council. I have with us this week a Dan. Dan, do you want? Well, hold on. I'll go through the whole everybody, and then I'll let Dan kind of introduce himself. So we got Dan with us. We got Eric Lehman from Game Changers, Jay Forty from the Greatness Zone, Thomas Pfeiffer from the Good Men Project, and Tommy Maloney from Blending the Family. Blah, 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 blah. And then now, Dan, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little background on who you are and what it is that you're doing.
Sure. My name is Dan Moriarty. I'm a former teacher in Parkway School District here in St. Louis, Missouri. I taught 10 years, 5 elementary, 5 middle school. I quit in 2000 to start I started teaching character development. What I do is I'm a martial artist as well. I'm an 8th degree black belt and Kaju Kembo and trained all my life in martial arts. But what I did was combine martial arts principles and concepts with character development through movement. So I go into schools. I've been in probably about 50 elementary schools, taught about 50,000 kids over the past 14 years, created 3 different programs, professional development, went into some corporations, although my love is children, so I stuck with that. Wrote a book. It's more of a training manual, create a product, and now I'm actually starting a national training program, and hopefully in Ferguson, Missouri, starting there with my programs. Very experiential.
Very cool. Very awesome. Sounds a lot like you and Jay have some things in common that you might want to talk about.
Sure.
Very cool. So that's good that you're on, since today's show is about character, and the idea is how do we as modern dads, take our character in our lives, the characteristics that we have that we want to emulate to our children, right? Or have our children emulate of us. And so I thought we could discuss that a little bit today. So it's perfect that you're on. Dan, do you want to kind of elaborate more on your classes and what it is that you work with the kids with?
Sure. I guess what I found teaching thousands of kids, as I found out really where their shortcomings were, where their limitations were on learning character, learning responsibility, learning self-control, learning respect, learning perseverance. And what I did was design the program around that. So, there's a lot of things. I mean, in terms of even just some of the societal patterns that in fact, just 2 days ago, I talked to a woman in China who's a liaison from the U.S. to China, and she was talking about character development. We were talking about our program, and I was explaining my program to her, and she said, my gosh, after 15 minutes of that, she said, my gosh, she goes, we have the same problems. And my point is that there are patterns, societal patterns in our children that limit them from really taking hold and ownership of themselves, of developing the authentic self, as some of us probably would call it, and I would call it myself. One of those things is, that maybe we could all discuss and talk about is the pleasing pattern, the approval. What I found with children is that they're doing things for their parents, they're doing things for their teachers rather than themselves. And what that cultivates over time is a lack of sense of self, an inauthentic self, because they have to develop a persona of someone else in order to get that approval. And I've done the research behind it. I know exactly where it comes from. If anybody here depending on how old you are, Tom Harris back in the 70s wrote a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. Has anybody heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's the basic premise of, children when they're growing up to the age of 7, they look at their parents as God. They are everything. They're learning everything from us. They're, moving along, hearing and listening and being taught this whole time. Well, unconsciously, what they do is they make a decision for themselves, and they say, well, if you're okay and you know everything and you're okay, then I don't know everything yet, so I'm not okay. And this is a window of perspective that they take out into the world, right? So now they're saying to themselves, well, I'm not okay, so what if you're unconsciously not aware that you're not okay, what do they need? They need approval, right? And where are they going to get that? Well, from their teachers in front of them, right? From their parents in front of them. So they're constantly doing things, and where's the intrinsic motivation? It's not there. We're all wanting as parents our children to have this motivation inside themselves to grow and to, flourish and be successful in whatever way that they can develop themselves. But yet, they start off in the world with this pattern, and I've seen it. I've trained 50,000 kids. All of them do this. And that's, we were talking about the kids in China. Same thing. That they grow up, cultivating this external motivation. So what I do in the program is that I completely get rid of that for these kids. And I'm talking about from 5 years old, up to, 13. And we say, hey, let's start doing things differently. We're going to start doing things for ourselves. So I know this is an issue for a lot of parents. It's an issue, and I can talk to you from my perspective more with more clarity from a teacher, in that for 10 years of teaching, I controlled my classes. and it's a very key word, control. I controlled classes in order to have a class, right? And it's almost an innate thing that we do, not only as teachers, but as parents, is that we want to control. Well, in this control, what we're doing is that we're saying to these kids that, look, I'm in charge, you're not. I'm in control of what's going on. So are we controlling a class or our children, or are we teaching self-control? Those are two different models to run by. And I found that out. I'm I did it for 10 years. I had great classes, but I never knew that when they walked out of that classroom were they actually controlling themselves. You see, so it's about teaching the self-control, and it's just something that we do as parents. We want the best for our kids, and as a teachers, we want them to learn the curriculum and do their best while they're there for that hour, and it becomes a thing that gets in our way of developing any type of motivation for our kids. I'll stop there. You guys can lead in and talk about.
Big.
That was awesome. I think, Dan, thank you for sharing. Right off the bat, I'm going to launch right into Jay 40, because he teaches a course called Life Possibilities that kind of helps to become aware of your choices. So, Jay, do you have anything thoughts that you could elaborate?
Well, so two things come to mind right away, Dan, and thank you. And I'm glad that somebody's watching that. I kind of picked them up when they're 14, not really aware of what's been happening to them before, and expect them to be able to be self-aware enough in order to start to look inside to figure out what unique abilities they came packaged with, when they don't have the mechanism to even value that they are different and unique, and that they're there to live out basically what's right with them rather than what the world has told them they should be. And I know the biggest block that I have to deal with kids in the programs that we're doing, and Life Possibilities is one, but the other one I find that we're starting now, and it seems to be a bigger appeal for this, is one we have called Life Leader. And Dan, I think it speaks very directly to what you're talking about. We try and show them what the core abilities of somebody who leads their own life looks like. Could you be ready to own the things? We just throw them, we're great with alliteration, I guess, so we have the 5 A's. Awareness, can I help you tune into what's true, to stop and notice what's going on about what's really truth? The
Yes.
second one is authenticity. And again, I love that you started that. And the only reason I mention these is I think maybe there's a lesson in this conversation for us as parents on what are some of the things that we're seeing and what are some of the tools that are out there, because we inherited a lot of what we do about parenting from our parents. And we've been perpetuating this, not meaning to, but what it means is that we're a little bit off. So awareness, hey, tune into what's true. Second is be authentic. Understand that when you noticed about you what was different and unique, that was for you to use, because that's your competitive advantage in a world. This is what by nature you are better at than someone else, so that you have a place that allows you to be it. The third one is adaptability and resilience. In fact, I think that's what you were talking about, Dan. The fourth one is accountability. Just because I can doesn't mean that I'm not accountable. So the fact that I want to tell my parent this is the road I want to be on, I don't get to just do it. I still am accountable for the fact that I have to show up big to it. And then the final A, sorry to rush through all these, but I know I have a bunch of other dads that want to talk. So the final A is achievement. Leaders get things done. So they're aware, they're authentic, they're adaptable, they're accountable, and they get things done. So to me, the mindset that Dan is talking about is how are we gearing our kids up to be responsible, character-driven, moral-driven, virtue-driven people who then can step boldly into their role as an adult in our world. So to me, I think part of it is dealing with them, and the second part, let me just throw this out and then I'll throw it to everybody. I think the big reason why I'm such a fan of coaching in today's world is that what kids need most is the responsibility to be asked what they're thinking and dealing with, instead of just dealing or giving us back what we told them. So the one of the things that we talk about all the time is, when do you parent, when do you coach, and when do you mentor your kids? In other words, when do you tell, when do you ask, and when do you share? And I think we spend a lot of our time, and it runs into the workplace and it runs into our relationships, in tell mode. We're busy telling, and I think the people on the other side of it now lose their authenticity, because what they're trying to do is fit into what they've been hearing, rather than someone asking a question about what you think and throwing the accountability and the authenticity and the ownership of your own moral character back to you. So I think those two things are going on. I think there's a need to bring our kids, where Dan was talking about, into the fact that you own this, it's yours, and you have to step into it. And the way that we do that isn't to tell you how it's supposed to look, but start to throw out the really empowering questions that say, what do you think it should look like for you, and how do I help guide you to a place that's different than the one that you're in now? Now I'll pass it off to you, Chris.
All right. No, that was beautiful, Jay. Maloney had a good comment here. He says, as a dad, we also need to let our kids know when we make mistakes. To help build character is mirroring and, again, admitting when we messed up. So, good point there, Tommy. But now, Thomas, did you have something you wanted to throw in?
Yeah, I did. From a lot of different places. I'll try to.
This is a big subject, yeah.
It's a huge subject, but building on some of the things that Jay said and what you said too, Dan, it's so important to know what kids really care about, what they're interested in, who they are as people. I mean, school, to me, and education is to help them find that and discover that, not to drop onto them, this is what you have to care about, this is what you have to pay attention to. Yes, there are some things that everybody needs to learn, but to find that passion, because no one is going to succeed, no kid's going to grow up and succeed in something if he or she doesn't have some passion or some caring about that subject or discipline or job. So helping them find that, and that gets to the authenticity that Jay was talking about, but then also going back to what Dan was saying, the sense of, we fight all the time the idea that external validation is what validates you. We tell people, we preach that it has to come from within. And yet, to your point, Dan, we have a system that imposes external validation on our children. And so they're aiming to please the teachers, they're aiming to please us. And so that contradicts this sort of message of, well, but it's all about, it's all about you, and you don't need other people's approval. And and that. So one thing that I think can counter that, besides obviously all the great educational things that you're talking about, is to praise them just because. To praise them not because they got an A on something, not because they did some good thing, but just to say, you're great. Why am I great, Dad? What did I do? You're just great. You're just a great kid. You're just wonderful. You're just a terrific human being, and let them know that sense of their greatness comes from within. And then one other point I wanted to make, and I think this is in response to something that you said too, Jay, about sort of like every kid being different and each child having a special quality or characteristic. I think that we now live in a world where tolerance of difference and acceptance of difference is so overemphasized that everybody becomes the same. The difference just disappears because in our effort to tolerate the idea or the fact that somebody is different, we're not even acknowledging that they're different. We're pretending that people are not different. And everybody is different, and it's wonderful. And I think we need to celebrate the differences and figure out how to acknowledge people's differences without stepping into that area of, well, you're not being politically correct because you're pointing out that this person is a little different from this other person. But if you don't embrace the idea that everyone is different, then you just then those differences and along with them the special characteristics that everybody has, I think they just disappear.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Eric, did you want to chime in?
Well, sure. I mean, what was really interesting about all of these conversations is I've had a whole bunch of different conversations about folks who would do a holiday letter. I don't know if you've seen this tradition, but there's all these holiday letters I see, like, they're so external and they're so, like,
Yes.
for lack of a better term, like braggadocious about like all these external things. And yes, I love that we get to celebrate differences. And I was recently just thinking about like what would my holiday letter be, and what would I want to celebrate around each of my kids. And I think it would be a really short letter. It would be like, Mason, he's happy, and then Talia, she's happy, and Alana is happy too, and I feel like what I love about this group is that we are expressing the sort of unexpressible, and in some senses is that like we're kind of helping to let other dads know that it's okay to do things differently, and so like from this moment on, we can applaud our kids for developing their own character rather than creating mini me's. I think that's what I used to practice, sort of like two things, kind of like reverse parenting or opposite parenting, where I just wanted to give my kids everything I didn't get. But that was just a very kind of external, top-down perspective. And on the flip side, I wanted each one of my kids to be like bar bas mitzvah, because I was. And now I'm more of a Buddhist than a Jew. And, so it's just kind of interesting evolution. And I love this environment because we get to talk about how, even in the first part of our parenting and our fatherhood, we're all shifting together. So, I mean, and I love this group because I get to figure out how I can do things differently, not better, but differently because of all these other amazing influences. So every time we record, I find myself just more and more in gratitude for being able to express this sort of stuff and let other dads know that they're not alone in shifting the way we think. So I love this.
Beautiful, Eric, and absolutely, I'm right there with you because I learned, like, Jay has me, okay, I need to be more organized and I have more things like, Jay, how you are. And then Thomas, like, yeah, you got everything planned out. It's awesome. That's your strength. And it makes me want to try and do that more. I look at Pfeiffer and his writing ability. It's like, I want to hone my writing skills. Tommy, you talking about the blended family and everything there. It's like, I want to do more of that. Like everything that everybody's doing, I want to do more of that here at home locally. And so sometimes it's like I want to take off more than I can chew, but I definitely feel where you're coming from with that, Eric. So, Tommy, we haven't heard from you yet, so speak, sir.
First of all, Eric, I had to write that down. More of a Buddhist than a Jew. I love that. That's a bumper.
In certain neighborhoods.
Yeah. I'm trying to decipher my notes as Thomas was speaking. You're talking about, and we're all talking about character, and as dads, we want to have our kids have the right character and the right, I guess, healthy mentality and healthy self-image. And so one of the things I'm struggling with is my son had his first cross-country meet this week, and I was very blessed that I wasn't working the day job this week, and I was able to see that. And before the race started, he and I were talking, and he said to me that he was talking with his mom about how he wants to get rid of, for next year, not playing basketball, not being part of student council, so we can focus more on competitive hockey, or as we call it, travel hockey. And this topic of character really resonated with me because I don't want him to drop those things. Even if he's sitting on the bench for basketball, that's character building right there. Student council, I mean, that is a life skill that he's going to take with him, to help with speaking ability. And so I'm really, again, struggling that he wants to drop these extracurricular activities to focus on one sport. And as a dad, we want our kids to have the right character, and we want to do the mirroring, like I was mentioning in the little comment section. And it really hurts that he wants to just focus on hockey, and I'm going, well, I guess as far as character building goes, you're with a team for 6 to 7 months, you're practicing about 5 times a week, and so I can see the yin and the yang, the balance of it, but I'm personally I don't want him to drop those things. And so Dan, you're talking about the youth today. I think that's a life skill that we might have failed our kids years ago, that we're not doing more character building. And I'll throw it back out to the rest of you guys.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring it back to Dan. Doing what he's doing in the schools, coming from that teacher role and getting in there. So Dan, did you want to comment on everything that we've been talking about?
Yeah, a couple things. Let's see here. Thomas, I really empathize with your feelings. And, as Eric says, hey, you're not alone. We all go through that. Your child is now making a decision, to do something. I was a PE teacher, and I'm an MMA coach. I have a son who is a record of 2-0 right now, and I've struggled with those things also. But what we have to remember, Thomas, is that it's not about us. My son trained with me and didn't finish his black belt yet. He has a brown belt with me, but as soon as he got his brown belt, a guy, Tyrone Woodley, who was a USC fighter, he wanted to go train with him. Now, how did you think that made Dad feel?
Yeah.
An 8th-degree black belt. I have a lot of experience, and I'm a great coach. And what happened is that I had to go through the struggle, right, of the sense and feeling of abandonment. But that was me. Our children that's how our children are our teachers. I can't force my son to say, hey, you got to stay here. Sorry about that, buddy. He's 15, 16 years old. Sorry, you're staying here. You're not going there. I mean, how can I, step in the way of his progress, of his own development in his own way? So I had to say, okay, I'm just going to let this go. And, with sports in of itself, there's so much character to build. Challenges introduce us to ourselves. They introduce us to our character. And sports is the perfect way to do that, and to be a part of that, experience with him, and to see him develop and then maybe even bring about perspectives and ways of seeing things for him in that light could develop so much character for him. And I'll tell you what, as sports is concerned, I just did martial arts. That's all I focused on. I didn't want to do all these other things. Yes, I played some things in high school, but I didn't do the 6 or 7 things all at once, because I wanted to, and I'm not saying everybody needs to do this, but I just focused on one thing. And for me individually, I'm glad I did. I learned a lot from it, and it's taken me this far. So your child is developing wings, and he wants to fly. And if he's starting to make decisions for himself, and it's a struggle for us, but I'll tell you what, I mean, that's how our children teach us. Our stuff comes up, right? And we want to control the situation and say to ourselves that, hey, this is the best way. But it's really their direction and their life, that we have to honor and appreciate. And I know that's not the easiest thing to do. And Jay, I was going to talk about some of the things that you had talked about, accountability. I heard you say the word ownership. Over the years of teaching this program, I found that this word responsibility has a lot of baggage on a collective consciousness level. It really does. What I found with our children is that all of our kids think that responsibility is something you have to do. So if you're thinking it's something you have to do, you become victim of whatever you're doing, right? I have to do homework. Oh my gosh, that creates a reaction. Well, all our kids are like that. Even though us as teachers and parents, we want them, no, it's a choice. We'll say it's a choice. We'll say it's a choice. But if you ask a child, and I've done this to thousands of kids, do you have to do homework? They will say yes. But really, it is a choice, right? We do know that. That's empowering to know that you have a choice. In that moment is where you feel the sense of empowerment. When you say, hey, I do have a choice to do homework or not, because there are consequences to it. So, I do change that model for them, as they're moving in through the elementary with that perspective. But that's where they come off of, And I'll tell you, Jay, the one thing that I had a business coach of mine who went and met with Walmart, the hiring. I'm not sure of the title, but here's what her issue was. Because Walmart hires a lot of teenagers, right out of high school, as managers. Here was her issue. Her issue was this, is that we can't get our kids to make decisions. I mean, think about that. They don't know how to make decisions. They haven't done it. They haven't made choices. They haven't done that. It's something that needs to be cultivated over time, and we can do that at the lower level. It's just interesting. I wanted to throw that out to you, Jay.
Cool. I've got a couple of things, and thank you, Dan, for that. So let me try and roll them all together. I have a client who just this week told me about his son, who is a very gifted lacrosse player, but doesn't make the effort. And so he was struggling with how to inspire this kid to do it, and he was stepping right boldly into being a parent. Here's what you have to do. I'm going to pay you for this. I'm going to make sure you do this, so that the lesson was, here's what it looks like when you do it right. The issue was that he's a high-performing kid, but he's taken the easy way out of everything. He has a pretty good cum because he takes the easy classes. He doesn't have to work that hard and still has, doesn't have to pay much attention to his relationship with a girlfriend, because he's a good-looking guy, so that means that everything comes his way. So the conversation we had was, how do you ask questions that allow your kids to start to see that they're not in competition about, being okay with what the world says, but they are aware about showing up to the greatest potential that they have, that the conversation is, you against your potential, or you in light of your potential. And what we were coming to was, how do we then create the character of excellence? That what we're looking for is for you to be your biggest and your best self, whatever that is. It doesn't mean you're the best. It means you're your best. And the ability to take that competition out then creates the opportunity for the parent to ask really good questions. So Dan, I'm back to you with the question part. So there is this requirement, or we see this over and over again, about them trying to be responsible. To me, the biggest thing that we do wrong as dads is that we step into dad mode and tell. And I love the fact that the awareness, and this was, talk to any of these guys that know me, this was a really hard shift for the opinionated Italian who is in tell mode most of his life, and now is really trying to shift into ask mode. So the coach training for me, which was difficult for my instructors because they rolled their eyes all the time and threw their hands up, as Jay would step in and say, okay, here's what I think you should do. And really no point in there were they ever asking what anybody should do, because the person on the other side needs to be accountable for that. So how early can we go back to our kids and just ask a question? And what I was trying to do with this client of mine was to see if the way that you're talking to this kid is pushing him into behaviors about achievement for you, instead of understanding and asking questions about the achievement for himself.
Yes.
And that yet your questions are to help him realize that he's playing small. Even though he's the best, he's still playing small. And it wasn't that it's time for him, to have the biggest cume or to be the best on the team. He bumped into a coach that saw he was playing small, and the coach cut him from a really important game. And he was absolutely overwhelmed because he had no idea that he was playing small, though everybody knows by watching him run the sprints, he shows a blast. It's just over and over and over again, he was choosing small. To say you're playing small doesn't serve him, but to say or ask, how might you change what your approach to this is that moves you into second or third or higher up in running the sprint than always being the one who's at the end? So to me, I think that's a combination of how do we encourage character in our kids? Well, we ask them early about what character is. And we start to see what they see, and maybe we give them permission to start to have an opinion different than all the rhetoric and the noise that they get from the world about what is and have to be. Maybe we shift them out of competing to be the best and starting to realize what's unique and grand and great and amazing about who they are, and think that that's okay.
So I just have a question, and maybe Dan can help with this. Is this kind of the point of the, what's the schools do now? It's some people love it, some people hate it.
Common Core.
Common Core. Is that the goal of Common Core, is to have them helping each other, and so it's less about the grade and more about your individual potential and helping kids? So if you have one kid that's greatness is helping others, they're now able to use their greatness in the classroom. I mean, is that really what
Sounds
Common
like
Core?
Montessori more than Common Core. I think Common Core is, here's the minimum level of what you will know in order to graduate, so that you will, my perspective, look and sound and act like everybody else. I think Common Core says at minimum you will know this. So challenge that. That's my understanding of what Common Core is. And I don't think it allows us to anybody to step into their greatness. I think it steps everybody into their averageness, because it says, here's what everybody should know. Let's stop there. I have no. That's my perspective. Eric, do you have a different perspective being taught? Because my kids are grown up, so.
I know there's a lot of controversy around the Common Core in the schools, but that just brings me, that's why I asked Dan, like, as a teacher, have you seen that? Have you found that that's what Common Core's goal is? Because that's my understanding of what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, the academic standards, right?
Yeah. Well, it's because my understanding is that they have academic standards, but the reason that Common Core is different than what was, when I was a kid, before Common Core was implemented. What's different is that Common Core allows the kids to help one another to learn and develop different learning strategies. I'm really asking, and maybe you retired from teaching before you're really able to dive in, but I'm thinking about our theories, and this kind of came up in a conversation about Common Core. That's why I'm bringing the question to light.
Yeah, the one thing I know about Common Core, and you're right, I'm probably out of sync with the application of Common Core, and seeing that, because I'm so involved in, when I go into a school, I go through their physical education scheduling. I see all the kids, and I'm there for a week and a half, and I'm doing constant character work. But, maybe someone else can share what they feel about, what you're talking about, Chris, as far as it helping others to help others. I know a basic understanding of Common Core, but I'm not sure exactly what the depth of that is.
I don't know that much about it, but I think that all of these national standards and all these things that are applied to the schools and the standardized tests, they are things that make the educator's job easier or make the college admissions person's job easier. They are not really, in my opinion, very reflective of who a child or a student is or what a kid's actual abilities and things are. I think they're devices and things that really do work more towards a sense of sameness than a sense of
uniqueness,
difference, of uniqueness, right? So I think we have a great challenge in our educational system right now, because it's not designed, it was never designed to generate future creative leaders, future independent thinkers. Our educational system, our free public educational system was designed at the time of the Industrial Revolution to create factory workers.
That's right.
This is why you have bells in schools. This is why you have tardy slips and all these things to keep the students docile and submissive to authority so that they can grow up and go work in a place where they are also docile and submissive to authority and don't really think for themselves. Now, that's not to say there's not a lot of great stuff happening, sort of on the margins and in some of the better educational systems, but the whole design and emphasis of it really, I think, needs to shift if we are going to be generating, a modern society of creative thinkers, of entrepreneurs, because all of those people who are doing that are basically people who bucked the system. They're basically people who said, you know what, this isn't for me. I don't function well in this kind of environment. I need to break these rules. I need to go out on my own. I need to do something different here and show my individuality. So what we have is all these, people who...
heretics.
Yeah. Right. It fit into the system and succeeded in spite of it.
So guys, I checked out, what Common Core is. Thank goodness for Google. Common Core is a set of high-quality academic standards in math and English language arts and literacy. These learning goals outline what a student should know and be able to do at the end of each grade. So it's exactly what Tom's talking about. It's this sameness thing. And here we are from an industrial age, as we shift out of an industrial age into an intellectual age where we could be encouraging the things that Dan's talking about. How do we bring it earlier into our kids that they should be independent, free thinkers who access their internal greatness and bring that greatness forward? And the way to show it big in your life through, writers like Seth Godin is a great book out called Linchpin, What Makes You Indispensable. It's this different thinking that says, I'm not a cog anymore. That's not how we work. And the biggest ideas come from people who are good at knowing themselves, knowing the world, and putting the two together. That's what creates entrepreneurial thinking. And you don't have to start a business to have entrepreneurial thinking, but imagine if our kids were opportunity hunters as they looked at their world, understanding the way they come to it, seeing things in there, and then choosing things with the guidance of what parents do. Here, let me expose you to what your world has available to you. What do you think about this? How about this? What do you want to try? That doesn't mean that they're entirely free to just make up whatever they want. But when they say, here's what I'd like to try, then the follow-up question is, so what did you notice about you? Is this for you? How do you move forward in this? How would you be responsible and accountable in that? If I can throw that to Dan, that word accountable and responsible. I just think, we're at the serendipitous moment where the world changed for us and we didn't yet. We're still parenting like we're in the industrial age. And I hate the word manager because that's the word parent in the workplace. Do this, act like this, fill out this report. But what if we had coaches in the workplace who realize that the best performance comes from those who stop and think, who stop, notice, then consider, then do things, instead of this auto-programming that happens. And I think we pull that still in the advertising and the marketing and everything else we hear, that that's what life's supposed to be like. And that's why our kids are so twisted, because that's not at all the world they find themselves in, but that's still the model that a lot of parents bring to the kids because that's the one we learned.
And if we had a different model, I'll be real quick about this, we would be creating leaders who are not afraid to hire independent thinkers who might be smarter than they are, because weak leaders hire submissive people because they're afraid.
That's a quote.
Strong leaders hire people who could actually take their job and do it better so that they could move on to something else.
Yep. And I think that's my goal with all of this is that, in a dysfunctional model of education, I can bring something into that model and try to start shattering the old beliefs and the dysfunction, and create leaders and create followers. We need followers too. Not every child's a leader. There are followers too that love that role, but it's individualized, it's personal, it's authentic to them. But, that's my goal, is to step into that dysfunctional, it's just, there's so many things about it that just don't work. And I love Thomas's idea, and because I say and feel the same thing. It's just we're, building these docile, kids, controlling them in a way, and that's what those tests do. Where's the learning? It's all about test taking now, and teachers complain about that to me all the time. It's all about test taking, and it's stressful for them as well. But we're building this model where they go and, they're, go to college, of course, but they're going to become probably in debt by the time they're out of college, and they're going to work for somebody, rather than what Jay's saying is coming into this entrepreneurship, this ownership of their own life, and deciding for themselves what they want to do.
Can I offer one thing about college? Because I teach a college class, and one of the things I find is that they come in victimed already. They let the world tell them what they should be thinking. And they said this to me at one of the times we were asking them as we were guiding them through this process on a little bit of self-discovery. They said, we're really confused because we have both too few and too many options at the same time. Our world, and our parents and our school tell us, here's the 5 things we can pick from. And then we look at the world and we see all of these things that are out there, and now we're someplace between and we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to go there. And the challenge in that is that they hadn't realized that it was for them to choose, or that they should have used some of this time that they were moving through high school to go and experience the world, to figure out what lights up for them and what doesn't light up for them. I love the analogy of the plane that lands on a runway. So a friend of mine is a pilot, and he said, the reason where they know how to land, or how they know how to land, is that the runway they're supposed to land on lights up. Wouldn't that be cool if we're hovering over the world and the things that are for us would light up? That means that the things that are not for us are dark. So you don't have to pay attention to everything. You don't have too many choices. Now all the choices that are there are for you. But what did we do to help you find out what lit up for you? One of the things we proposed to a couple of college presidents was, what if the problem with college isn't college? What if the problem with college is freshman year? These kids aren't ready to make some of the decisions that they need to. What if they had a gap year where everybody had a gap year, and you go out and live in that gap year and find out what's true in your world for you. And then you go ahead and get yourself into debt if that's fine for you. But the statistics are 46% of people who start college ever finish. A 4-year degree takes almost 6 years to do, and most kids who graduate have $20,000 to $30,000 of debt at the end. For what? For an English major degree, now you work at Pottery Barn. So, that isn't in all cases, but the thought that went into it to set up the character to be who you are in your world wasn't there. So they blindly, like Tom said, blindly moved along, went to college without a purpose, incurred all the debt, and let the college tell them who to think, what to think, what to do, and all the rest. And now that I know there was a whole lot of broad brushing in there, but the thinking or the concern that I see all the time is that I don't even see the colleges stepping up to do that, which is fine. You know what? To me, that's what a parent's supposed to do. It's our
Well, they
job
don't.
with
The
our
colleges don't want their kids to figure that stuff out because then that's less classes that they're taking towards nothing.
Then we can have that same discussion about church. But okay, so what is the broad thing that encourages you to think boldly on your own instead of let everybody around you dictate what you should believe, what you should think, what you should drive, where you should live, and all of that stuff? So I'll get off my soapbox now.
All right, Eric, I'll give you a chance to chime in. I know you've been biting at the bit.
Well, I mean, and I feel this. I mean, I love this conversation because there's so much passion around it, and what I like this eureka moment that just came into my system was that, one of the reasons that we have Common Core, it's not for the students, but it's for the teachers.
Yeah.
It's to better evaluate our teachers, and and that's where I started to think back to the holiday letter, is that then we get to prove that we're a great parent, by all of the things our kids achieve, and we recreate this cycle generation after generation, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in the the school place. There's just so many different ways where we recreate what Dan was talking about in the beginning, like this whole pleaser thing. And, how do we get points in the external world? And then I was also thinking about this time where my son, when he was like 5 years old, was going to quit dance. He was like saying, and I sat him down, like what we're talking about, and I said, well, why do you want to quit dance? And he's like, well, there aren't that many boys in dance. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. There are totally not that many boys in dance. And then I put my salesperson hat on. I was just like, well, did you know that, if you stayed in dance, you'd do really well in athletics? And he was 5. He didn't really care about that. And then at some point I was just like, well, did you know that girls really like boys who can dance? And he was 5. He didn't even know if he cared about boys or girls. And so, at some point towards the end, I was just like, well, Mason, did you know that your dad really liked to dance? And that's where the conversation changed. And then he holds out his hand as if to make a deal. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, and I'm like, are you saying that if I sign up for dance, you'll stay in dance? And he said, yep. So we shook on it. We had this gentleman shake, and I just I looked him in the eye. I said, sounds great. And I went into the living room and I told my wife at the time what I was just committing to, and I learned that the only thing that fit my schedule was adult/teen hip hop. So, true to my word, I show up to adult/teen hip hop. The funny thing is, I danced that whole year. I showed up. It was a Father's Day recital.
I want to see some moves.
Yo,
I'm
Eric.
somewhere immortalized in parachute pants and a whatever. At
least it wasn't disco.
This red netting, whatever.
Okay,
I was there, and it was a great moment. The funny thing is, 10 years later, well, less than 10 years later, my son has no recollection of that conversation that we had on his, in his bedroom, and yet he's still in dance. So I mean, regardless of what I needed to achieve, and I thought this was like a Saturday afternoon special kind of memory conversation that we were both gonna have, and I was like, I'm gonna be in the annals of fatherhood for this one, and I mean, he doesn't even remember it. So I mean, that's where we get more humble and say, you know what? we're great parents because we care, and like, no one's got to give us an attaboy but ourselves. We know the job we're doing, and it doesn't matter who else gives us the attaboy. So I guess that's what's boiling over in me.
Thank you, Eric. That was awesome. Okay, who's next? Who wants to add to that? Jay, did you want to bring your dog in?
Yeah, no, sorry.
Good.
I would add to that, Eric, because I think one of the things that, as you were talking, was about parenting, which is, you went from, controlling the situation to diving right into your heart and connecting. And I think that's really where we're not trained as parents, of connecting with our kids in that way, in that moment. And when you did that, look what happened. It was awesome, to hear about that. But I think that's one of the issues that and awarenesses, I think, as Jay was talking about, is just being more aware of connecting with our children. When we do that, things happen. The connection is there, and you have that relationship starting to build and cultivate. It was awesome.
Yep, absolutely. Now, Thomas Maloney or Pfeiffer, you started to comment on the sidebar about college in the U.S. as being a privilege, whether it's you pay for it with wealth or by going into debt, as opposed to being free. Did you have more that you want to elaborate on that?
My point was that in many other nations, college education is free, and so you don't have the same burdens put on it that you have in this country. I mean, if you're a kid in this country and you're going to college, and unless your family is wealthy, if you're financing that with debt, there's a whole range of jobs that you just cannot go into, because you need to earn enough money not only to support yourself, but also to pay off that debt. So an entire range of jobs that are things that you may actually be interested in it's not available to you because it's not financially possible for you to do that. So options end up getting restricted. If kids could go to college in the U.S. and not have to pay for it, or have a very minimal expense, and then come out and be free to choose whatever profession they wanted, not burdened with that kind of debt, I think you would have a different environment. And there would also be less pressure sort of on the college model in general, because it's so expensive. Whether your parents are paying for it, whether you're financing with debt or whatever, it's like, oh my God, I have to come out of this college thing with my profession all wrapped up and defined, because if I don't, I've just wasted $150,000.
Right. Yeah. So that's where I wonder, like, how big of a scam is college in the first place? I mean, I look at what I do for a living, and if I would have gone to college and wasted all that time, first of all, the time, like a lot of the stuff that I do is online and like Facebook marketing. They don't have a college course for Facebook marketing. And if they did, by the time that it became a college course, it would be completely outdated. But, then again, I know in high school they're adding more and more programs to help. I know my mom taught podcasting as not a full course, but it was the portion in a course that they had a little introduction to how to set up a podcast and do all that. So, I mean, they're making strides, but when it comes to college, I mean, shoot, by the time you graduate with a degree in something, half of what you've learned is outdated. So some of it, I look at the validity in going to college as saying, how valid is a degree? And I talked to my dad about, he hires a lot of engineers. Like, what do you look at when you're hiring? He goes, well, I'd rather see experience over a degree any day of the week. So I'm like, well, then why is it that it's mandatory for you to hire somebody with a he can't even hire anybody without a bachelor's degree. Now, he might hire somebody with a bachelor's degree in English, even though he's looking for an engineer.
Chris, let me offer something. I mean, maybe if we step away on high end, and what if we just challenge some of the institutions that we think are true that are just currently not true? So there's an awful lot about the way our schools teach our younger kids. There's a lot about what goes on in college. That maybe there are some outdated models. I mean, I find it because a lot of my work is in the workplace. The workplace still hires based on skill and experience in a talent-based world. Why does it do that? Because it's stuck in an old model because that's just slow to change. What if, that's what I meant, what if the challenge was to get colleges, for instance, to say, no, you can't possibly start until you take your gap year and do something, that relates to who you are, because I don't want you here until you've done some self-awareness stuff in order to show up bigger and better, because I know the results that will happen here are more significant. We spend a lot of time with colleges trying to say, look, isn't the big problem you have the fact that you keep putting people into majors that don't make sense for them? They've got low cums and then nobody gets a job at the end. Well, why is that? Where in this model does it need to change? And in that, just as a reminder for us as parents, where in our model of parenting are we stuck in something that's not working? The character building is, what is it that I do today? Not because everybody does it, but because it generates the results that we need. And I've got to believe if we have 3 kids, we've got 3 different ways of handling character building going on in the family. That means how open and connected am I to the moment? That, to me, I'm back to the self-awareness thing. Stop and notice. In the stopping and noticing, you can then consider what works for this kid, and this kid, even if it's different. I can't even imagine what the parent of a transgendered kid has to think about, because every model that's out there doesn't give them any guidance. So to push them into college, push them into something, means we just keep relying on our old models. How then do we as modern dads, isn't that what we're about? Modern dads, challenge absolutely. Models that don't work. And I'll stop now. But to me, that's where I think the overarching message is, how do we call it for what it is? It's outdated. What should we do to change it?
Eric, you wanted to talk about being transgender?
Well, what I love about living in Ithaca is that I can talk about almost any group of a population that's going through transition. And what I love about my community, at least the stories that I've heard, is that some of the parents of some of the kids are so amazing, and I want to showcase them, because I just want to just shout out to a lot of these parents who are actually asking their kids who they are and supporting them through this amazing transition. And I mean, there are 14, 15, and 16-year-old kids in the schools that my kids go to that are in process of transition. And their parents are behind them 100%, and there's tremendous support, and I'm just amazed by it. And I guess what I want to do is, as we come close to the end of our show, just understand that we are making progress, evolving, and even though education is, I think, in many ways broken, there's us. There's, and I guess what's also interesting is that we're also all, looking at it, all of us are divorced. So I think the 2 institutions need to be looked at the most are marriage and education. So because I think neither of those sets of rules worked for any of us. I mean, for me in particular, all of the people I look up to in the world are either like college dropouts or never went to college in the first place. So I mean, take Richard Branson and all these other amazing people. We've got all these amazing modalities, and we only tap into one of them in the education system. So I'm excited about the future to come, and I'm glad that I send 2 of my 3 kids to schools that don't have report cards. They don't have grades. They have like comments and evaluations. So I'm pretty pumped.
That's very cool.
I just have one thing to add to what Eric said, and building on what you're talking about with marriage and also with the kids, who are in transition. We're talking about systems that are broken or systems that don't work, and we talk about this a lot at the Good Men Project. Gender is a system. Gender is a social construct. And so as we start to strip that away, it is tremendously liberating for people not to be limited by the stereotypes, by the boxes that are associated with their gender, and to understand that that there's a choice there as well. You know, it's really hard for people to wrap their minds around it, but to understand that not only is orientation, you know, it's not necessarily a choice, but you know, people get to choose whatever it is that you want to do. Be yourself, and the same is true of gender. And if we can look at some of these things as systems that have been imposed on us, as opposed to just the norm, you know, then we can be a lot freer than we are now.
Amen.
Well, one of my great takeaways from this show was, you know, the question to ask is, how do we as modern dads challenge our current systems, and how do we as modern dads challenge our children to be more authentic versions of themselves in different areas of the world? So what I'd like to do now is go through to each one of you, and give you an opportunity to kind of talk about something about today's show that really stood out for you, and have you highlight that. And then I'm going to wrap it up with Dan. And so, Dan, I'll come to you last with your takeaway from the show, and then just kind of a chance for you to give the last comment. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, Maloney, can we start with you, and could you kind of share a takeaway from today's show?
You know, and I just wrote this to all the dads here, and that is, this is one of those shows that, you know, even being a participant was great just to kind of sit back and listen. And the biggest takeaway I would say from today's show is that, you know, and I think it was Eric's point, is that we are doing it. You know, as a modern dad, we are doing our best. You know, even though we're all divorced dads, but we are building character. We are building, you know, not just toughness for our kids, but we're building, you know, what I hope is as a legacy for our kids. And you know, that all comes from, you know, us being more involved with our kids. And you know, lastly, we are not the dads that went out to go get a pack of smokes and never came back. We're involved in our kids' lives. So I'm just honored and blessed to be a part of this group. And like I said, I spent more time just wanting to sit back and listen to all these great points of view. And so I just hope the takeaway isn't just from us today, but others that are watching this.
Beautiful. Pfeiffer?
Well, you know, I think that we've had, even in this conversation, you know, we're all kind of on the same page, but we've had different expressions and different viewpoints, and somehow or other, despite the system, we've all managed to embrace. It's a struggle always for all of us, but to embrace that authentic self. So I'm impressed with everyone in the group, and you know, sort of seconding what Tommy says. Just I think it's amazing that we can all come together and share this stuff with everyone else. Learn from each other.
Beautiful. Jay.
I think the big takeaway for me today, Chris, is to hear the magnitude of comment and the magnitude of thinking, and I love that about us. And to both of the Tom's comments already, you know, part of the reason why we're here is that we don't play by the same rules. You know, we didn't stay in relationships that were not right, and we have made it right. But we're a little bit of the social outcasts sometimes by what we do. But good for us. You know, that what we do is we look at a system that doesn't work and we try and bring it to something that's better. And I think maybe the biggest lesson in all of this, if you're about sharing with your kids about what character is, it's about showing up to the world as the world is and challenging things that are not right, even if the rest of the world does it. I think that's what character is.
Beautiful. Eric, I'll go to you next.
Sure. Well, I mean, I kept on thinking of a lot of the books that have shown up in my life, and one is The Happy Child. The other is The Element by Sir Ken Robinson, and I was also thinking of a book like Who Moved My Cheese, and a lesser known book called I Moved Your Cheese. And I feel like we are the cheese movers of this world, and I'm excited and honored to count myself amongst this this energy, because it's really exciting, because I do believe that we are on the cutting edge of fatherhood, and it is amazing what we all uniquely bring to the table, even though there's such a beautiful common thread between all of us. So I'm just I agree that this is probably one of my most favorite shows, because I'm also a very present person. So
beautiful. All right, Dan, back to you. What was your kind of takeaway of the show, and then I'll give you an opportunity to kind of let people know where they can reach you, and if they want to start following you, how to do so.
Sure. Well, the show was great. It was awesome. This is my first time here. I do know Eric, and I'm honored and privileged to meet everybody else and hear about what you do, and I'm just amazed. I'm excited, to hear that we have some real creative and out of the box thinkers, that are breaking the molds. As dads and as parents and as teachers and coaches. So it's just exciting to hear. It really is. It's kind of hard to put into words, how fun this was, and to feel like this is more than just a talk show, but yet it's people that I meet, who have like Eric said, a common thread. And I guess the thing that I would say, I guess there's a couple of things. One is I'm about building the foundation. I think everybody here is building that foundation, at the core of our children, so that, as Thomas was talking about, and using the word and expressing the word of being authentic, being themselves. And it's just exciting to hear the different perspectives and ways and that people are doing this. So I'm excited to be a part of the group.
How can people get a hold of you, Dan? Do you have a email or a website that they can go to learn more about you, if they feel that are you open to coming to schools and speaking and doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, my next project here is I'm actually from Ferguson, Missouri. I lived there my first 5 years, and I'm wanting to go through their elementary schools. They have 17 elementary schools, and bringing this program there and start assisting the community. Now, is Ferguson the only community that needs help, or that could benefit? Of course not, but that's somewhere I would like to start. And I'm going to just start pushing a national training model, and starting there and training teachers from the universities that who may not be able to find a job, who are interested in coming aboard and with Stick with Character and moving and doing that. So that's my next project. I'm looking at corporate sponsorship right now and talking with some people about that. And you can reach me. You can see my website at www.stickwithcharacter.com, or you can go to Facebook and facebook.com/stickwithcharacter. On that site there, or on Facebook, is a lot of videos and comments and things that you can see more in depth about the program and what I do, and really actually the program in action. So
beautiful.
My email is stick, STICKW, character, CHARACTER, @gmail.com.
Awesome. Cool. All right, cool. I was jotting that all down real quick as you were just saying it. So that was awesome. Dan, I want to thank you for being on the show today. Also, I want to thank Eric Lehman, Jay Forty, Thomas Pfeiffer, and Tommy Maloney for all joining us here on the Modern Dad Council. Today's episode was about character. It was fantastic. I want to thank everybody. How do we help our kids know themselves? And this show really helped do that. So I can't wait to speak with you all again next week. And thanks for being on.